how to use data that comes out of a tractor to do something else. So, whereas some jobs will be destroyed, I am not one of the people who believes that all jobs will be destroyed. I am one of the believers that new kinds of jobs will be created, so that technology will do the kind of things that we shouldn't do, and then we will combine with technology to do the things we should do. So technology would improve not only global productivity, but human productivity also. But it depends on finding new ways to do it. Let me conclude by using three postures that I always talk about when you're faced with change. There are three postures that you have. There's what I call innovation. Innovation, you are dictating what happens. You are making the change happen. And for those who are going to succeed, they are the ones who are going to make the change happen. Because humans develop the technologies themselves anyway. So if you want to go and succeed, make change happen, dictate the pace. But you cannot do that all the time. And therefore, agility becomes the second response that you have to this one. And the agility is like this. Let me use a boxing analogy. I mean, I'm sorry if you don't like boxing, but I do. So let me use a boxing analogy. Anybody knows Floyd Mayweather? Floyd Mayweather. Yeah. The characteristics about Floyd Mayweather is that you can throw punches at him, you will never land because he knows how to dodge the punches. Okay. Now, when I talk about innovation, it's you carrying the fight to your opponent. When you talk about agility, your opponent is carrying the fight to you, but you are reacting fast in such a way it doesn't land a punch on you. You are finding spaces of opportunity that you put yourself into and work through. The final one, so I've talked about innovation as a response, agility as a response, and then the final one is resilience as a response. Resilience, still using a boxing analogy, resilience, you are hit, you don't fall down. Or you are hit, you fall down, you are not taken for the count. And so you've got to build resilient reserves in you. Sometimes that is financial resilience reserve. So when people start talking about universal basic income, it is a financial resilience reserve system that we have. An educational system that focuses not on content, but on mindset is an intellectual resilience reserve system that we can have insofar as that. The way in which systems are organized in the world in such a way that we kind of slow down the implementation of technology in order for us to be able to respond, to match our response to it. It's a social kind of resilience reserve system that we build. But I'm saying that the human race would always have to deploy these things, innovate to make the change happen, being agile to be able to dodge the impact of the change, and then being resilient to be able to withstand, not dodge, to withstand the impact. If we do that, we will not have machines as our masters. We'll master machines. They'll improve our productivity. They'll improve our lifestyle. That's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. So, Ravi, I'll ask you now the next question. So, what is the World Economic Forum doing in more tangible terms, especially maybe specific industries, areas, that we can probably see some change happen, like in the fourth industrial revolution itself, because the idea came from there, and I'm sure there is a lot happening that we want to know about.
Sure. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'll share maybe one tangible
thing,
and then one thing which I think is a little bit more systemic in nature. So the one very tangible thing, which is actually highly relevant for the Shapers community, is that Professor Schwab is launching an initiative around fourth industrial revolution compatible cities. I think some of you might know about this, but basically the idea is that we actually want all of our Shapers hubs to almost act as an infrastructure to help prepare their cities for the fourth industrial revolution. And the mechanism through which we're currently thinking of doing this is through having Shapers actually conduct interviews and evaluation of their cities along certain different dimensions of fourth industrial revolution preparedness, right? So on technology dimension, in terms of policy dimension, other criteria as well. In order to basically be able to create like a global index of fourth industrial revolution preparedness as a kind of information wake-up call for cities to see how they're doing, and then also similar to this exercise we're doing for the Shapers community, to be able to look at on a city level where are the strengths, where are the gaps, which are the cities that are doing better in certain dimensions of fourth IR preparedness. And so that's something very tangible that we're starting to launch through this community. We also work a lot through our constituents, right? And so part of what we're doing is trying to sort of elevate and raise the profile of some of the most fourth industrial revolution forward people. So we have a sister community of the Shapers called the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurs, and we have members of that community that are actually looking at ways that we can use things like drones for delivery of healthcare outcomes, right? We have also social entrepreneurs who are using similar tools to what Prashant showed us with being able to kind of look at health outcomes and to kind of do predictive analytics around health outcomes. So a lot of what we're doing is also trying to raise the profile of our constituents that are doing this type of work. And again, as a platform, convening those actors with other actors in order to make sure that we can really scale the fourth industrial revolution for economic growth, for inclusive societies, and for a variety of other purposes. The one other thing that we are doing is actually thought leadership. And one of the big principles that we have been really pushing in the age of the fourth industrial revolution has been this idea of systems leadership.
Okay.
And we're looking at it along three key vectors, which are basically technology leadership, governance leadership, and values leadership. So on the technology side, I think the key thing here is really to help systems leaders to make more informed decisions about how they invest in certain technologies of the fourth IR, how they integrate those fourth industrial revolution technologies into new business models, potentially existing business models. How do you change and disrupt value chains through these technologies? And so that's something that we are encouraging our constituents to think about as they engage with us. And of course, we kind of build that type of thinking into the interactions and experiences that we develop when we convene people. The second thing would be around governance, right? And so we've seen considerable examples of this with Uber, Airbnb, where sometimes technology is actually ahead of where policy is. And so it creates considerable inefficiency, increased costs, delays time to provisioning of certain useful services for people. And although we can never predict everything that will ever happen, I think it's up to us, and especially those who have influence on the governance space, to be able to try to think proactively about how do we actually put in place the governance and policies that are actually empowering and enabling the fourth industrial revolution rather than following behind it. And then the final thing, which Noel actually touched on when he talked about ethics and morals, I think is the values component. We sometimes think that values are a very kind of soft, fluffy thing that doesn't really have a place in the world of the hard, data-driven fourth industrial revolution. And nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I think the fourth industrial revolution, if we don't get it right, has the potential to fundamentally change certain aspects about what human beings value, how human beings currently engage with each other. And I think it's up to us to bake that consideration of values.
Can you give us one example of the value system change?
Yeah, absolutely. Work, for example, right? As much as everybody complains about work in today's context and how laborious it is, I guarantee that if tomorrow nobody had to work, we would be faced with an existential question of what do we do? How do we find purpose in our lives? I mean, work for a lot of people is the way in which they channel their mission in life. I think this is something you mentioned yesterday in your remarks. And so imagine a world where people had to, if what we're saying about universal basic income becomes a reality because every useful function that human beings currently
has already been done.
AI and robots can do better, then it raises a fundamental question that challenges
what do people do with
the nature
their
of humanity. What do people do with their time? And not only that, but what motivates people? If it's not work anymore, what is the thing that you wake up in the morning to do? Right? If through my own effort, a robot can build a building better than me or provide healthcare better than me, what is the thing that human nature is basically, what continues to fuel our reason for being here? So I think this is a really good example of how our values and what we value could fundamentally change. And I think it's important as we think about the fourth industrial revolution to understand those impacts and to potentially actually design technology around the values that we want to see humanity continue to be centered around. And in the case that those things will change, I think that's also a fundamental question that we'll need to grapple with and how we adapt to that.
Interesting. Thank you.
And I think just a comment on that also. I mean, the relentless move of technology is about often efficiency in the workplace, etc., like that. And in a sense, it's not very different from what Frederick Taylor and others started in the scientific management age. And there comes a time that you got to then ask yourself where the value of a human being sit within the discourse of efficiency, etc., and what kind of trade-offs can you necessarily make insofar as those things are concerned. And so in terms of the workplace, for example, you would have to have, if you like, almost a philosophical position or a moral philosophical position that work, the future of work is human, and that technology enhances the future of work rather than displaces. And that if technology would have to displace work, it has to displace the kind of work that dehumanizes people in the first place. And it has to then work with people that in a manner that liberates the human potential. And that takes us to another level of, if you like, of our existential experience, and that makes us more human than anything else. And those are conscious policy decisions that have to be made. Because if I use it as a segue in doing something, McKinsey did a study about what can be automated and what cannot be automated now. And they were asked, why haven't people automated what cannot be, what can be automated? They gave 5 reasons for that. One is that the technology should be there to automate to begin with, which we don't have a problem with. 2 is that the cost of developing and deploying the solution must be reasonable. Most of the time, people could answer yes to that. Number 3 for that is that the labor market dynamics should work in favor of automation. Most of the time, it could. Number 4 is that overall, the cost-benefit analysis should favor automation. Most of the time, it could. There was a 5th reason, which is where human salvation lies for me, is social and regulatory acceptance. That becomes almost the last line of defense insofar as social and regulatory acceptance becomes a point. And I'm saying that the ethical issues are based on that. If you go into biotechnology, for example, there is no need for a man in procreation. I mean, the male sperm can be has been artificially engineered already. There's no need, not even as a sperm donor. But what does it mean for institutions of society, marriage, etc., and things like that, and conjugal relationships and things like that? And what does it mean if those things are out of this thing? What does it mean for things like rape, etc.? There are a whole host of things that people need to think about. And it is policymakers and think tanks and influencers who have to begin to speak to these issues and see how those moral issues can be looked at. And that, for me, is a challenge that faces humanity. The one person said, the technology would always be there. Technological problem will solved. It's the sociology that we need to look at. So I leave that with you. The technology will always be there. It's the sociology that needs to keep pace with that. And it's the sociology that we are suffering and struggling with at the moment.
Thank you. So I'll pause here for a second. I'll invite any of the shapers here if they have any questions that they want to ask any of the panelists. So we have the mics. Ankit.
Yeah. So thanks for this discussion. And can we throw some light on blockchain technology, like how the usage will be and what will be the future implications?
Sure. Do you want to take it?
Yeah. So your question is ideas on how technology can be adopted.
No, blockchain.
Blockchain. Okay, sorry. Okay. So blockchain is a very interesting technology with amazing implications. What blockchains enable is immutable records. That's all it does. And the way it does it is creating quorums which decide where, so the data can be resident anywhere, and they create multiple copies of that data which is where the consistency is decided on the quorum. Now, so that's the basic concept of blockchain. Microsoft actually offers a blockchain on the cloud, by the way. So in theory, if you want to try out the blockchain, go create an Azure account, and in 20 seconds you can start your first blockchain.
And still a distributed network?
And it is a distributed network. But the point about blockchain is, imagine wanting to have immutable records. And I'll give you two very interesting examples that are happening in India right now. I'm involved in one of them. Imagine, so this is just a thought right now, nothing really has happened here, but imagine, your banking transactions. Imagine your banking transactions are happening with one bank. What happens if that that is happening between you, the bank to bank, the bank to government, this system is happening. What happens if that transaction whose record is being kept in one place blows away? Can happen. How do you deal with it? What happens if somebody reverses that transaction and the previous record goes away? God forbid, not intentionally done, but just as Dr. Noel was saying, good things, similarly, bad things can also happen with technology. So you have a set of, hackers who are out there trying to disrupt the world. Blockchain is a technology that creates these immutable records that through the process through which it is created, you can always go back to all the previous version. Now, how that is done is a conversation for PhDs, and we can have an offline discussion on this. But in essence, think of anywhere where you want an immutable record. I'll give you one simple example. Today, you want your phone number transitioned from one mobile operator to another. So you make a request to your Vodafone to switch to Reliance, or Reliance to switch to Airtel. You make a request and there is no record of it, right? So there is no way for you to go back to the other provider and say, I made a request to provider X on day 0, and provider Y to whom you want to switch does not know that your request has come. Suppose this was an immutable record that could be shared between the two. Now you can hold this guy accountable if he's wanting to delay you, and that guy accountable to make sure that they pull you out. Possible through blockchain.
And so in addition to immutability, there are two things I'd add to that. This other thing I'd add to that is transparency. So there's a possibility of transparency within a blockchain system. And that is why, for me, public blockchains do a lot more good than private blockchains insofar as we're concerned. So just making sure things are transparent. The other one is frictionless interaction, and therefore the reduction of cost of transactions almost to the point that it is zero.
Exactly,
is an important feature of that. So businesses can take place in there. And if you want a live example, in a manner that is useful for a country like India and from the country that I come from, land tenure systems and land titles are hugely controversial things. The government of Honduras at the moment is using blockchain as the means by which they record land titles over there. And then think of the political process. When your votes, you want to use technology as a means of voting, and you're using a blockchain style thing over there. So the possibilities of holding people accountable, you see, when you have something that is immutable and that is transparent, it gives you the possibility of holding people accountable, because transparency is a currency of accountability. If you can see, you can hold people accountable for that. And if there are other empowering mechanisms that we have through social media and development of social media, etc., then we can hold people who are in power accountable. And that, for me, is the promise of blockchain, quite apart from the financial and stuff that is attached to it, like it being the media through the medium through which Bitcoin and our cryptocurrencies came into view.
Thank you. So I come in from a fintech background as well. So if I had to give you a live example of what is happening, a lot of remittances companies globally are right now using blockchain to start transacting across borders using blockchain itself as a technology as a base, because then they're able to reduce costs of transactions with the banks a lot more. The intermediate banks that used to exist before don't have a role anymore. So if you've ever been to, say, a conference, and if you had some money to receive from there and it has never come for a long time, like now, one example is that if blockchain is used, that transaction can happen almost immediately if required. And that part is amazing because we can see that impact happen on a real-time basis, which I feel is a much more practical use for which is almost in the process of happening itself. And there's a lot more other stuff happening in terms of trade and finance as well, wherein countries that are using it for import-export. A lot of those where tripartite agreements or bilateral agreements are there, those agreements are also on blockchain these days, where it's very easy and seamless in terms of making them on blockchain, so that once the transaction is completed, the data can be stored for later. And that has been a very important thing for the use of blockchain as well. Next question. Can you please specify your name and hub, please?
I'm Varun from the Hyderabad Hub. My question is to Noel and Ravi. So I think a real worry as the fourth industrial revolution comes is that the innovation that's happening is not empathetic to people who are usually excluded from the system. You spoke about your father being laid off for 3 years. My biggest worry is that India's greatest resource is dirt cheap labor, which will possibly lose jobs really, really quickly as all of this happens. I think that's because innovators themselves come from privilege, right? You go to HBS, you're hearing things that are being told at HBS, and hence you are building solutions for people who also possibly go to HBS. I got dinged recently, sorry. So as you kind of see these people build solutions for other rich people, and you see that people who are more lower income and don't come from privilege aren't able to innovate, I am deeply, deeply worried about the future of how work would happen. So how do you go beyond market forces? How do you make innovation more accessible to people from lower incomes and marginalized people?
Before the answer, actually, I'll just disagree on one point, and we can choose to
Sure.
disagree. But I would not say that all innovators come from privilege itself. Because I think fundamentally, if you see a lot of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs as well, right, who've been at the heart of innovation, they probably have come from middle class background or working class backgrounds as well.
That's geographic privilege then. If you're in Silicon
No,
Valley,
it's a geographical privilege per se. A country like Israel also has a lot of innovation
Geographic
happening.
privilege.
And sorry?
Geographic privilege.
No, again, so I agree, but what I'm saying is, if you're talking of specific universities where they're coming from, then it's not the only case. There are a lot of like frugal innovations that even Prashant was talking about, right, that are happening within the country, but we probably don't give them as much as weightage as we probably give some of the other ones, because they highlighted a lot more.
Okay.
So yeah, please, Ravi and Noel.
There's no easy answers to this. I think two things I could offer. I think one is that one of the things that we do have as an opportunity is to actually start educating younger people for the skills that will be relevant for the fourth industrial revolution. Right? So within the Shapers community and the Young Global Leaders community, actually, we have several members who are working on various types of initiatives to train young girls in Africa and India around computer programming and coding skills. And this is happening in a lot of different places in the world, right? And so I think by preparing younger people today for like the skills that will be relevant for the fourth industrial revolution age is something that we can do. Now, does that solve the problem for people like my parents? You know, my parents are in their early 60s. I'm not sure they're going to learn computer programming or the skills of the fourth industrial revolution. And so I think it will be up to us to figure out what does the solution look like. I think universal basic income or something like this may end up being the solution for people who we can't retool for the fourth industrial revolution. And so I think that's potentially one intervention. But what I would say is that in terms of inclusion, I think there's two aspects of it, right? Like one is the aspect of like, what do we lose, right? And potentially certain types of jobs will change. As Noel said, different types of jobs that we probably can't even think of right now may emerge. But then the other aspect of this piece of the puzzle is actually, does the fourth industrial revolution offer new ways to help support and provide benefits to those same people, right? So I gave the example before on how drone technology is being used for healthcare delivery. You could imagine also a world where, you know, through video, or I think somebody mentioned the example of holograms being used to provide, you know, healthcare interventions to remote communities in combination with 3D printing and things like this. I think there are a lot of innovations of the fourth industrial revolution, you know, self-driving vehicles, all this type of stuff that can actually help to provide low-cost services to people who may lose out on the opportunity to, you know, have a typical traditional job to earn income to then pay for those services. So I think we have to look at the whole ecosystem of what the fourth industrial revolution does, both in terms of cost and benefits, what's lost and gained, and for the things that, you know, are lost, which maybe we can't gain through the fourth industrial revolution, we will have to think of policy interventions, potentially like universal basic income, to help support people.
Thank you.
And that is primarily, the only thing I'll say is that developing countries like India, China, where I come from, the focus of education has to change from rote learning to higher order forms of learning. The type of education also has to change from the teacher is the master and a hierarchical form of education and society to a more liberating and also more democratic forms of society, because that is where you unleash the creative potential of people. Because the skills that you need to survive in the fourth industrial revolution is creativity, that you've got to be part of the innovating set, and you've got to be part of you've got to have an ability to adjust very quickly. Your ability to adjust very quickly is also a function of your mindset. So it is, for me, it's a growth mentality, growth mindset, the I can do mindset. I am aware of what is happening around me. I am always negotiating spaces for myself in order for me to be of benefit to what is happening. That is the mindset. It doesn't matter what indeed, I mean, content becomes very little. You can get any content from anywhere. You can do a lot of analysis by computer. Let them do it. For you. Yours is to be able to determine what do I use technology for and how can I make technology useful in terms of that. As I sit down, that is my job, to make sure that accountants are not kicked out of work. You know, and I have 5 year thinking in terms of that. And my job is to create the spaces for that. And I share some of the sympathy that you have in terms of the class, the geographic, and then whether you are in the north or the south, developmentally, whether you have access to some of these things and what work is going to look like, different arbitrage systems, etc. The first thing I'll say is, young people, hold your politicians to account. I mean, I wouldn't vote for a politician because he belongs to my tribe or something, or because he belongs to my party. I vote for a politician who is seeing the future and who has policies that would address the future, who is thinking about education in terms of some of the things we're talking about, in thinking about economic policy, social policy, etc., in terms of some of the things we're talking about. Because when we don't do that, we lose the plot. And the structural, the suffering comes from the readjustment that we make to technology. In the past, technological change was slow, and so we have a lot of time to readjust. Now it is fast, so you can't readjust. And that is where unemployment and things like that come in. Hold politicians also to account in terms of these things.
Okay. Hi, good morning. I'm Anupriya from the Lucknow Hub. And so we are working with municipal schools. And each school has around 300 kids. And then there are neighboring communities with 1,000 and 500 people each. So I was very glad when Prashant sir mentioned the example of that farmer and his idea of innovation. So what my question is, that while we are working with these little kids who probably they don't even know which letter does the word digitalization starts from, you know.
Yeah.
So how do we address digitalization, evolution, any kind of technology in these schools, with these kids, with the neighboring communities? Because when we talk of India, we say, or when we talk of any developing country, we say that, you know, the power lies in the youth. So how are we supposed to build this amongst the youth and the neighboring communities?
Let me take that.
Yeah, please, Prashant.
So, Anu, we share the same city. I grew up in Lucknow. I was born and brought up in Lucknow. So it's very interesting to hear somebody from Lucknow. But let me share a central thought, and this worries me sometimes. And I agree with Dr. Noel and Ravi when they say that, you know, technology can do things, but it can also do things to harm you. And Dr. Noel pointed out how it can create bombs. And so my central thought, my central premise here is values are the lanes where the human mind flows. And therefore, with these children and even among this young community, the fact that you adhere to a set of values is what is going to decide the action that you will take through technology. The decision to use technology to solve a farmer's problem so that he will grow more wheat, and you can predict weather, and therefore you can say sow the seeds on Thursday and not Tuesday. That same technology can be used to create bombs. And the distinguishing point there is values. Whether just because you can is not whether you should. There's a very famous line from Jurassic Park. Just because you can, should you? And that's why, in many ways, the roles that I see the global shaper community, and I was just intrigued yesterday in learning those 5 principles. Values is one of them. You are the upholder of that in the communities that you connect with. I'll tell you one other very interesting story, and it will tell you the power of this community of 6,000. 6,000 amazingly driven people and what they can do. It's the power of, the squares or the race to the power of. So I had a friend who once helped me a lot when I first went to US, and all he asked of me, we were sort of sitting one day philosophically, and he said, Prashant, I don't want anything from you. All I ask you is to help 10 other people in life. That's all. 10 other people that you have no benefit from. Just as you have benefited from me, 10 other people that you will benefit without expecting anything in return. That's what I ask of you. And I adhere to it, and it has been extremely exhilarating for me to see how that equation has come true. But the reason why I share this is, imagine this community of 6,000 to the power of 6,000. To the power of 6,000. And I'll bet if you calculate that number will be more than 7.5 billion people.
Much more than that.
So what I'm trying to say is, if you as a shaper community that is already in the right places, it has started at a place where there was a crisis, the Arab Springs. And our friend here, Ravi, was right in the middle of it. I don't know what he was doing in Tunisia, and I can't even begin to understand the fears that he would have gone through. And how he conquered them to be where he is standing here inspiring all of us. If this could be translated, then I submit to my first thought, which is, value is the lanes through which human mind flows. And if you create them in the right lanes with the children that you are interacting with, you would have, created a system that would leave you very satisfied, but also very helpful to the rest of the people.
Can I just add something to that one, please? All of us are born innovative, adventurous. Our parents beat it out of us. Our teachers beat it out of us. The education system is one of the most destructive of human innovative and adventurous spirit. And if you are there, and I'm speaking as an educator, get out of the way of the children's creativity in terms of that. And let them, you get a kid, you've not taught him anything or anything, she's observing, you give a kid a tablet, they start scrolling. Who taught a kid how to do that? But our education system begins to add some structure to it, and I'm not saying structure is not good, but we drive out, if you like, the lack of structure, which is some of the things we need for creativity out of the kids. Don't do that. Secondly, teach people to think for themselves, or help them to think for themselves. Because our education system is based on hierarchy. This person says, and so you got to do it. It doesn't teach you to think for yourself. Partly it derives out of colonialism, partly it derives out of class structures and things like that. We've got to beat that one out. And the start is from the kids over there. You give a kid a Lego piece, the kid will do something with it. You give a kid, the kid doesn't know how to spell digitalization. The kid will live digitalization, the kid will do digitalization for you without even knowing what it is. And I'm saying that anybody who's involved in education you have young minds to form and shape, be very careful what you do with it. And often get out of the way and let them be, is what I say to teachers.
Yeah, hi. Armstrong from Bhopal Hub. My question is basically to Mr. Prashant. Prashant, you were making a presentation on how the impact of innovation in the fourth industrial revolution has changed the health world, especially in the cancer law. So now I want to know how much impact has it made in the hospital across the countries. Have they started using this data analytical process to actually start impacting the way cancer is treated?
So,
And yeah, that's my first question. The second one is, okay, Microsoft and other giant technology companies, they keep coming up with technologies. Like one of my good friends from Hyderabad has just asked Ravi that, you know, in India you have lots of poor people who are dependent so much on physical and mechanical works. Now, what is Microsoft? You come up with technologies. So what are you doing to educate those categories of people whose job are under, you know, threat? Is Microsoft doing anything to impart a sort of technology, not only inventing those technology, but to impart those technology to the people whose job is at threat?
so I'll answer both the question, and I'll give you a real example of where this impact is being felt. So the first question is, where was all this technology actually, you know, impacting the people in healthcare and so on and so forth? In India, there's a large healthcare initiative that is going on, where you know, Microsoft is advising the government, and Microsoft is, in the larger scheme of things, Microsoft is a small player if you consider the whole of India, right? But it is advising in healthcare area using AI and so on and so forth. In fact, you'd be happy to know that you wear glasses. You're wearing glasses. If I told you that using artificial intelligence, I can predict with a reasonable amount of precision on whether your eye will deteriorate or not, and whether LASIK surgery will work on your eye to make corrections, and could predict that, you know, get LASIK surgery done, spend those 50,000 rupees, because the probability of getting this eye fixed is 99.99 versus 0%. You would laugh at me. And my answer is, it's happening right now. In India, we have developed this system with LV Prasad Eye Institute, and we are talking to other you know, eye institute in healthcare. Similarly, there are other things that are happening in India. The problem is adoption, and, you know, people have set ways, and it's kind of hard to change that way. Another area where it's very interesting to talk about artificial intelligence is another experiment that is going on, which is actually about taking the weather data and combining it with the soil data and saying that, Mr. Farmer, if you were to plant your seeds on Tuesday versus the previous Sunday, chances are there'll be rain and other things, and your crop yield will be higher. And this experiment is also going on in India. So the point of it is, you know, there is a technology adoption curve. We are doing our best to educate the people that we can, to tell them about the impact of this technology at scale. Second question was education. So Microsoft has a huge initiative around education with our resources. But at the end of the day, it is a tango, and it takes two to tango. So we find that there is new awakening, first of all, within India, within government, within private sector, within individuals, where we're getting out of the mindset of the past, which is all about, this is the way, this is how you do things, any other thing is not acceptable, right? So that mindset is changing. It's not changing as fast as we should, perhaps because of our colonial lineage, perhaps also because of blocks that we have. That's where all of you come in. You know, you will be the agent of change. Microsoft has, 7,000 people in India. The Shaper community has, 6,000-7,000 people. But the people that they work with are far larger. So you can bring that message.
Thank you. We'll have one last question.
Yeah. Good afternoon, sirs. I'm Vanshika from the New Delhi Hub. And, I was just thinking, Mr. Noel, gave that wonderful analogy with boxing, and you mentioned 3 ways of responding: innovation, agility, resilience. But, there's a concept of sort of known unknowns, but with technology there are also so many unknown unknowns, because you don't know what X and Y could lead to. And so I was just wondering, in terms of creating an overall ecosystem for human civilization and communities to be able to react and respond and create that environment where we can, in better ways, sort of deal with technology. If you could give some examples of that, firstly. And secondly, obviously, technology on one hand leads to democratization and homogenization, but also leads to differentiation. And there was a question on that line just a while back. So I was wondering if through an example you could illustrate how we're trying to deal with that. So for example, I'm aware that Microsoft is working on like the smart village concept in India. So how are ways in which you're trying to make sure that the fourth industrial revolution can curb the sort of differentiation that could come out? So, of course, we have to look into reskilling, we have to look into digital literacy, we have to look into localization, vernacular language being brought in, and so on. So could you give some examples with regard to both of these?
So if I had to rephrase your first question, Vanshika, you kind of asked that how are the two unknowns bringing in like a change? If I can...
Boxing, because the opponent can come from anywhere and can be in any shape and form.
Correct.
So...
Okay, so I'll give you some examples from what we are doing at the moment, and then I hope this is not being recorded because it's probably commercially sensitive, but it addresses the kind of issues that you're talking. Oh, you're recording that. Okay.
They started recording the moment you said.
Or edit this one out. But I am in education, and I'm in finance education. And the people that traditionally my predecessors looked at as competitors were other finance bodies. So if I came to India, for example, I look at the chartered accountants as my competitors. I look at a body called ACCA as my competitors, etc. I don't look at them as my competitors any longer. I see Microsoft as one of my competitors. Okay? Because, I operate on a membership basis. We have members, we pick up money from them every year, and then we provide some services. So it is my relationship with members that matter. Okay? LinkedIn has something similar, and much more people than I do. Facebook has something similar. Okay? I started watching LinkedIn about 5 years, 6 years ago as what are they going to do with that membership model and the data they had.
Yeah.
And then I realized that LinkedIn bought Lynda, which is a learning platform. And then my heartbeat starts going up because they've moved into my space. They have scalability, etc., and they have the possibility to disrupt what I do and things like that, if they have the mindset to do that. And because I'm an incumbent, I'm welded to my previous investment, my previous culture, and everything such as that.
Yeah.
But I say, well, that's not going to happen so much. And then Microsoft then goes to buy LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, okay, now this is becoming very serious. So there are people who are still seeing the chartered accountants in India as their competitors. They are not being innovative in their thinking of reframing the landscape, the ecosystem in which they live. And I'm saying that part of your innovation is not innovation in products extra, innovation in reframing just where you are and what you're thinking about. So for example, let me give you an innovation, Uber and Co. They reframed from this is a transport organization to this is a computer on wheels. And because they reframed, they disrupted a business model completely. they moved away from how to, once you have a computer on wheels, and computers, you don't have to own computers. You know, there's a sharing model, etc., and things like that. You bring a whole host of mindset into it that connect with each other and create new realities that others don't know about. And you disrupt an industry. That is one of the examples that I can give you of what to do. And then we are sitting on tons of data. In the past, we didn't have the ability to interpret the data.
Yeah.
Because of AI at the moment, and machine learning, etc., we have ability to make sense of the data. Start making sense of the data in ways that people do not think in terms of that. Now, there are many more things I can say. Time is not on our side, so I'm quite happy to engage with people to give examples in terms of that. But insofar as this is concerned, my key thing is reframe what you're seeing. And then, by the way, be bloody minded, if pardon the language about that, but have huge confidence in yourself. You know, have huge confidence in yourself that if I say I will do it, I will do it. And I can bring the people in order to be able to do it. Communities is the name of the game. Platforms are the name of the game over there. You don't do things alone. You might be an experience provider on a platform, be the experience provider, but connect with an asset provider, connect with a platform provider, connect with a process provider. Create the synergies that would mean that you can do things. And because you are in a sharing, almost temporary stuff, all the relational, if it doesn't help, you exit out of that, you form that. The mutation and things like reframe, mutate, etc. I'm using the language of ecosystems now because ecosystems is where we're living. And that metaphor has to be stretched to its end. And you got to do it. I'm doing it now. And I am confident in the fact that if all accounting bodies are going to go bust, CIMA is not going to go bust. I can bet my last bottom dollar on that. Insofar as I keep that position, I'll do that. Insofar as that's my confidence in that. Because I'm reframing and I'm mutating. Mutating an organization is difficult, but we'll mutate.
So to address your question on the digital village, I'll start out by saying that technology is a great leveler. It connects these two pieces, and somebody at the bottom of the pyramid now suddenly can aspire to be at the top. So that's the point that I was trying to make. But specific to the areas where this impact can be felt, technology's impact in communities around us can be huge. And to illustrate this point, let me just share the story of this digital village in Harisal. This village is in the back of behind. It was known as the malnutrition capital of India, with about 30% infant mortality, terrible situation. And at some point of time, it was decided that Microsoft and the Maharashtra government will play a role in bringing about a transformation in this digital village. I remember the first time I went there was not even a mobile phone that was working. And from there, we signed the MOU with them on 21st April 2016. I still remember the date, sitting in the Maharashtra Chief Minister's office. And from there, in about a year's time, we were, as a result of this technology, able to implement amazing changes. And then it started percolating to the next level and the next level. So let me start by telling you some of the things that we did. Well, one of them was using a new technology called TV white space. We were able to bring high-speed internet in 5 days. 5 days, flat. You install that system, you bring up the system, and because it is Wi-Fi based, non-line of sight, even a villager could set up high-speed internet. So we brought that internet. What we didn't realize was, when I first went there, I asked in the crowd, we were addressing this large crowd, and asked them, tell me, how many of you have actually smartphones? One hand went up, one hand. And that guy was visiting that village, so he said, I'm visiting here, so I have a smartphone. When we installed the internet, within 3 months, their first experience of getting connected to the outside phone was not a phone, but Skype and WhatsApp based calls. We created hotspots in this village, and the village community started buying cell phones and so on and so forth. So connected, first one. Second thing that we realized is we had this very systematic idea, and I'm not saying it's an end all, but it had 4 pillars. The first was connectivity. The second was how do you enable healthcare? Because we had this big problem of eye care in Harisal, specific to that area. And what we did there was, using the use of internet, we connected this to a live on the internet optothalamic devices. So a poor villager in Harisal now gets connected to LV Prasad Eye Hospital in Hyderabad and gets his eye examined from the confines of his village. And then telemedicine started happening, and people came together for doing citizen services on internet and so on and so forth. And then there were second order effects that started happening. For example, digital agriculture. Farmers started getting advice on how to improve their agricultural productivity. There's a mango tree organization that says, not digital, but connected with it, the beekeeping. It had nothing to do with, digital technology. But because this impact was going on, they joined hand and they started helping in the process of beekeeping, which will enhance agricultural productivity. The point that I'm trying to make is, in the new world, the attempt is to meld the physical with the digital. And if we think proper, and if we drive it through the right value system, and I'm insisting on that word, if we drive with the right value system, we can go far. The opposite is also true. We stand at a very, how should I say, at a great inflection point in our history. And from there, if the right value system drives this innovation and technology, will go up. If perchance the other value system comes through, then we will, we'll regress. So with that, you see the North Korea problem. The North Korea problem is not about ability to drive technology. What scares us is, will it be driven by the right value system? What keeps us awake? Otherwise, it's all fine. People are nice, but the value system is so very important. And that's where, we have to think about how we shape the role. And most specifically, that's the place where you as an individual, people sitting in this room as individuals, can play a significant role.
Thank you.
I'll stop here. Thank you.
So that brings us to the conclusion of the topic that we had, is digitization the mark of the start of the fourth industrial revolution. I think a few points that I took from the discussion was, it definitely is. There are a lot of things that are happening in the world that we need to pay attention to, be it AI, be it 3D printing, be it automation, and be it the changes that are coming in healthcare, education with respect to that. But I think a lot of valid points came in from the point that I think it's the values and the choices that we make, which makes the difference in terms of how we use that to make that fourth revolution actually valuable for us. Thank you so much, Ravi, Dr. Noel, and Prashant. It was a great discussion. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. I would just request, if the panelists stay up there, I would call upon Abhishek Mohan Gupta, founding curator Bhopal Hub, to hand over the thanking mementos. Dr. Noel. Mr. Prashant Shukla. Mr. Ravi Kaneria. And Mr. Vaibhav Lodha.